Yes, go
Okay.
ahead.
Hello. Okay. My name is BirdSatan. I'm 29 years old. Professionally, I am a RP tech. Full title is, I'm a junior, full qualified, level 3 junior radiation protection technician. Currently, I'm a contractor, and which means I'm a traveler. I go to different plants in America. Eventually, potentially have the opportunity to go overseas and work on some plants over there. But as of right now, I'm domestic in America. I started in the industry at 2019 as a carpenter, building scaffolds and joined the carpenters union and such. Then worked at a plant called Sequoia Nuclear Power in Tennessee. 2021, I decided to um, go through the courses to become an RP tech because more money, more risk, and
Oh my God, these templates are
just
so
far
annoying.
more interesting, far more fascinating within the STEM field itself. Maybe not directly, maybe not. I'm not on like the bleeding edge of the industry, like some of us are, like some of who are you. However, I am one of the people still blue collar, still maintaining the industry that previous technologies have made abundant. What does an RP do? Right, an RP, glorified meter reader. Yeah, we hold a thing up to a thing, read it. It says a specific number. Put that down on a survey. Yeah, right. Of course, I'm diminishing it, right? Our job pretty much is to control contamination, radiation, airborne radiation, particulates and such. Make postings for these areas, and then mark all that down onto surveys, which then goes into a database for the NRC in America. And I'll get to the NRC in a bit. Um, Pretty much how that all that operates. I work 12 hours a day. I get off day, right? Six days a week, right? My primary thing is for servicing refueling outages every 18 months. With typical boiler water reactors or pressurized water reactors in America. Every 18 months, they go down for refueling, which they pop the core, they shut it down, they pop the core, they pull fuel rods, put them in spent fuel storage and such, put in new ones, shuffle them around, anything that they need to do every 18 months. While that happens, other maintenance can be done because the reactor isn't, blaring, right? And so we're the guys that oversee that make sure that make sure that the radiological conditions that these people are getting themselves into are not harmful. Right? We're public health and safety, and that's what I do. As you can see, the graph, right? Okay, today pretty much going to be talking about the future of America's nuclear industry, a message and a warning. That's a music reference if for people who actually know what that is. A fun fact for you.
Yeah, I don't
The
know what
graph
music is.
itself, as like a guide, yeah, me neither. Oh yeah. Also, on the other hand, I'm a prog metal artist. Um, I got my band logo and such, and people know me by that. People know me more as a musician than an RP tech. The graph itself, just to go over what I'm exactly describing. You have the timeline, right? You have that thick bar at 2025, which is what we're going into. Not That's not 2024, but I'm future proofing, right? You got the timeline. You got the names of the plants, of the sites, of the units, because there are multiple units per site, denoted by the number. You have gray, which is the build time when they started and when they finished, and then you have the time that they have been online. Let me scoot the scoot
Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
forward. Have You have, and this will take a bit. You have red to denote the unit has been decommissioned, and then you have green, which shows that it's still online. Okay. There are other colors that are involved with this, but we'll get to that later. Okay. Pretty much, this is an outline of the history. Goddamn. This is pretty much an outline of the history of the industry, starting with the Manhattan Project. Everyone, you're all nerds. I'm pretty sure you watched Oppenheimer, as did I, 2-3 times. Really kick-ass movie. It was as soon as I heard that Christopher Nolan was directing that, I'm like, yeah, it's gonna be sick. So everyone knows the Manhattan Project. It was set in place to research and develop the nuclear weapons that was used in World War II, Fat Man and Little Boy. All that good stuff. The bombs, the two respective bombs, involved, dropped 1945. The World War II ends. World War II ends in 1945. And every time I click that. In 1946, the responsibilities that the Manhattan Project and the security, right, the logistics of the Manhattan Project was moved, or the responsibility of that went to the Atomic Energy Act, or in the Atomic Energy Act, right? It started the AEC. The AEC, Atomic Energy Commission, continued what the Manhattan Project started. What they were doing, the McMahon Act, I want to be specific, it was during Truman's administration. It was to set regulations on the amount of exposure that we can get from radiation, but also maintaining the stronghold on information derived from the research done at the Manhattan Project, because at the same time, just a year later, Cold War starts, because Russian espionage, American espionage, the two superpowers started to develop their own logistics and how to make world-ending devices. And so the AEC was responsible for leaking, or secret leaking protection. It's what made the industry so hush-hush for the longest time. They made secret labs that no one knew about for the longest time. Also, any of the weapons testing after Trinity, after Manhattan Project, was all conducted by the AEC. So that is absolute despair, right? For the longest time. Until 1954, administration switched over. We now have Dwight D. Eisenhower in office. His proposed Atomic Energy Act was the second one. Eisenhower. He started this thing called the Atoms for Peace program, and he made the Atoms for Peace speech at the UN, the United Nations, discussing peacetime use. Around. Okay, cool. All right. So the meeting at the UN, Dwight D. Eisenhower, beautiful speech, wonderful. Verbatim, this guy says, "Oh no, if we want to continue, okay, all right, nuclear bombs, right? Good for, national defenses and such. But do we really want to live in a world where, two, big boys of the playgrounds duking out, and everyone else has to cower in fear because if these two dudes go off, then everyone else suffers. Do we want to really live under that you know worldwide paranoia, right? So he's like, it's good for defense. However, we have better solutions for it, right? It can be atomic energy. It can power homes and stuff. And I said verbatim, but you know, on top of what else he did, right? He declassified information for the use of atomic energy. Let me repeat that. He specifically allowed uh, information regarding atomic energy to be released to private industry for the production of nuclear power plants. Because previously, it was under wraps. No one wanted to talk about it. It was exactly Cold War, right? Um, First one on American soil that was civilian, right? Because there were several experiments prior to the start of Shipping Port Unit 1. There were some other ones. The SRE, the sodium reactor experiment. We don't talk about that because that's military. This is civilian. Shipping Port 1, right? Pittsburgh, right? It was formed around coal plants, standing infrastructure. It ran for a pretty good amount of time. However, this graph has more secrets to it. It's not just that. Let me hit this button and hopefully it works. Yeah, hell yeah, check that out. In a second, you'll see power output, nameplate capacity of these sites. Whatever. In Why isn't that going? Yeah.
Showing for us, I think.
Oh, okay. That's strange. I would need to reload. Okay, so I'll continue talking. Whatever. The majority of the plants that were made in the 50s were anywhere between experiments and all that. They were metered in kilowatt hours. Right? A lot of the information gathered from the Manhattan Project and the farming of plutonium for the bombs, those designs to make plutonium went on to define the Gen 1 types of reactors. So far, the oldest still alive plant that's in America is where the hell is it? 9 Mile Point. The oldest plant is 9 Mile Point. It is in upstate New York on Lake Erie, Ontario. Lake Ontario. You think I'd write that down? 50s experimental phase with high temperature gas plants, organic gas cooled plants like Pika. A lot of weird stuff going on during that time. Still very hush hush. See here. Almost plants in America, still plants. Okay. Would you believe 95%, roughly 95% of the American nuclear industry was made in just 18 years? As much output, right? As they've developed, a lot of plants went up during that time. Historically, between the graph back over. Historically, Between 1954 and 1978, or yeah, between then and then, 136 plants in that time. Let me go down the graph here. If I move this slide, I'm afraid to move this slide. No, that's fine. Okay. So, big wide industry, all that stuff. Where have I been? I've been all around, right? I've been to several different plants, several different types of plants, right? I've been to boilers and pressurizers. We're past the experimental phase, and now we've settled on Gen 2, which is pretty much simply pressurizer, water reactors, and boilers, boiling water reactors. I can explain that later when we get into the details of some of the disasters that some of us know, but not many of us know. Uh, Personally, I've been to plants such as Browns Ferry, uh, yeah, Browns Ferry 1, 2, and then Oconee. Actually, Oconee in South Carolina is kind of funny. The way it was constructed, it was combustion engineering, defunct company. It's all three units started at the same time. Unit 1 went online prior to 2 and 3. The year that, and this is anecdotal. I tried to find this information, but this is anecdotal from somebody that I heard from at the plant while I was there. They said before Unit 1 was online before 2 and 3, the time that Unit 1 was online and the money that it made paid outright for the construction of 2 and 3. That's pretty fucking substantial because there's a lot of, that's massive, right? They output a lot of power, and that puts out a lot of, a lot of cash, a lot of cash flow. That's why you have a lot of these private industries. Free market speaks, right? Um, the design of the plant's kind of weird. It's one of the weirder ones that I've been to, and it's frozen in time in the like 1969 or you go there, it's still pretty groovy. But it also tells you how the cost of uh, of building a plant and the time it takes to build a plant has only grown as safety restrictions start to become a thing. Inflation being a thing. Uh, Funding, government funding for these types of for these types of places start to dwindle. Right. More on that later. I've been to Browns Ferry, Oconee, Surrey, D.C. Cook in Michigan, Brunswick in North Carolina, McGuire in North Carolina. I like McGuire. Millstones. I like Millstones. I like Millstone. Uh, Continuing down the list here. I've been to Watts Bar. I've been to this place called Palo Verde in Arizona. Pretty much kind of everywhere, right? So I feel like at least I know what I'm talking about in these regards. But that's me and my low confidence in this in this deal. Let me back up to one specific thing that'll be funny to talk about. Here. Where is this dude? Please hold for development. Where the hell is this thing? Okay, there's a plant called Beaver Valley. But yeah, Beaver Valley. I talked about Shipping Port, right? Just up the street from Shipping Port is Beaver Valley. Funny thing about Beaver Valley, right? And I think you guys, I specifically pulled this for you guys, right? Beaver Valley, their mascot is an anthropomorphic beaver. It'll show up there in a second. Anthropomorphic
Very
beaver.
important.
And me being a musician, this specific outed shirt was great. I like that. I love that shirt, right? It speaks to exactly everything, right? You know, and it being a mascot of it, you know, pretty much all the outage shirts, because every outage is something to commemorate, and people typically make outage shirts like that. Really cool, really funny. I want to go there specifically for that shirt, right? I may not be 100% in the furry community, but I can recognize, you know, the bridging of the gap between furries and normies through the means of character representations. I love it. Continuing down the list, ignore that little dude. We'll get to that. We'll get to that little square right there. That means nothing. Yeah, it's whatever. It's not a big deal. I'm sure it's okay.
I'm sure it will have no lasting consequences.
Of course. Palo Verde, been to Seabrook, and coming back down to the next docking point, Vogel, Units 1 and 2 in Georgia, of that plant. Any guess as to why I like that plant? And no, it's not because Vogel in Dutch means bird. Bird goes to a bird plant. Who'd have fucking thunk it? No, another thing about that is that it is home to 2 new units, AP1000s. Awesome. Great. I'll get to that. Setting you guys up for like this last nice slide into the thesis, right? But first, before I go in on the things that I love, right? Let me first talk about how everything has gone absolutely wrong, because I still have more. I have a lot of space up there. I wonder why. Huh. So, one more cool thing, or actually 2 more cool things. Palo Verde, right? Palo Verde, right? They're in the desert. They're in Arizona, right? They're not. All these plants are situated on active bodies of water, either the ocean or a big lake or a large river running through it. Right. Palo Verde doesn't have that. How does it cool itself? Because you need running water in order to maintain, cooling and such, heat transfers and such. How do you cool a plant that's out in the desert? Precisely. You use sewage water from Phoenix.
What?
Oh. They pull sewage water in, they process it on site, and then run it through, right? It's cooled by shit. It's cool shit. I love it. Yeah, it's great. Also, it amazes me. One, that Phoenix has that amount of water to give to cool a plant. 3 units, by the way. But also just the innovation. I don't think anybody else would have thought about that unless you have like top dudes. Plus also a lot of handshakes. I bet they don't pay for water. I bet, Phoenix is like, yeah, you can clean it for free and then send it back, It's a tit for tat. It's beautiful. Like it. All right. So, in order to talk about the next point, you need to talk about this. Historically, the industry up until I guess up until this point has been a boys-only club, right? Shocker, I know. Misogyny runs rampant in places that's all hush-hush and shit. You can see it in the geometry, and this is why I talked about the plants that I've been to. The differences between the older ones and the newer ones is just the geometry of the place, and you can tell when it was built based on how big the women's bathrooms are. right?
Mm.
Because there weren't any women there, so you don't need to build, bathrooms. Only later do these plants have to retrofit female bathrooms or women's bathrooms, women's locker rooms. Dudes' bathrooms are huge, right? Whole dance floor. Women closet. Some of the newer designs, especially Vogel 3 and 4, they have actual equal accommodations. So if there's any good growth that's happening in the industry, it's that. It's an aside. It's a good thing. It's just a good thing to have, right? A theory of it was, okay, women are more susceptible to radiation than men, right? Because women are soft and men are hard and shit. But a cell is a cell. A cell is just a cell, right? You have the one scenario where that is applicable, where occupational dosage exposure dosage matters, is when the woman is pregnant, right? Because you have a lot of stem cells being built up. The differences between these, right? And this is kind of important. You have 8 different types of cells have different types of radiosensitivity, which is how well how do I describe it? Its ability to defend itself from radiation, right? Because all of our cells are constantly, it isn't a zero amount of exposure that we get just being on the planet.
We get quite a bit
on this planet. Yeah, we get exposed a lot, and so our cells have adapted. Right? Certain cells are better at defending from radiation than others. Stem cells, the real nubile ones that they're not specced, they're not specialized into anything. They have no hard coding or whatever. They're not specifically, this or that. Those are the ones that are most affected, like reproductive cells. Going down the line, then you have blood forming cells. That's better, right? And you have gastrointestinal or organ lining cells. And then at the ends, the hardest ones, you have nerve cells. Since your central nervous system is the most defended from radiation exposure, right? So you have that list, right? Cool. Got that down. Pregnant women are only allowed to expose themselves to 0.5 or a fourth of the allotted dosage that occupational dosage allows. The NRC, right? The NRC, shit. All right. Who's the NRC? The AEC did such a bad fucking job really good job at keeping secrets, but a really bad job at regulating the industries that they were supposed to regulate. Right? So they were criticized for their lack, or in better terms, they were criticized for their lack of enforcement. They played fast and hard and such, and a lot of people got sick. A lot of people got cancer because you don't know if you don't know, right?
Yes.
Prior to
why am I
prior
sick?
To the, yeah.
Why I'm sick? You don't need to know.
Prior to 1974, it was pretty typical. Like you pop the core open, you're doing refueling, then smoking a cigarette. Like, hell yeah, man! Look at that glow. Hey, pass me a beer. Shit like that. It's a little dramatic, but you get the point. It was very relaxed. The Energy Reorganization Act of 1974 abolished the Atomic Energy Commission, and it was replaced by my daddy, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the NRC. And also they formed the DOE, the Department of Energy, to also survey oversights and research and developments into better things. Okay. That was 1974. The NRC is the one that sets the hard limits. If you ever hear anybody talking about occupational exposure, like 5 rem a year or annual limit of intake, it's that they set that. If you're ever hearing about ALARA, which is an acronym that stands for as low as reasonably achievable in terms of exposure, that's them. That's time, distance, and shielding. If there are 3 factors that can save you from, being overexposed, is those 3 things. You spend the least amount of time, and if you can't, you put the most amount of distance between you and it, a source or whatever. And if you can't do any of those, you put as much shielding between you and it as possible. Right? It's a very effective program. It's a necessary program. Everything follows that program. What else? They also do a lot to declassify a lot of this information. So in 1974, you have a lot of declassification. A lot of public knowledge and understanding of previously mystified industry. Anybody at Oak Ridge, during the Manhattan Project and several years after that, you'd ask them, "Hey, what are you doing? Where are you living nowadays?" "Oh, Oak Ridge." "What are you doing at Oak Ridge?" "No, I make washing machines and dishwashers." Real hush hush because of the AEC, because that was their job. Right. So everything is great. Everything's cool and all, right? The nuclear industry is chugging along. There's a plant up every day that one of these years in here, there's a period in time where you have like 20 plants, 20 units going online in 1 year. A boon. It was big. It was massive. It was what was up. Right, up until a specific point, called 3 Mile Island Unit 2. Wait for the graph. There you go. 3 Mile Island Unit 2. What happened? What the hell happened? In 1979. Okay, all construction of new sites stopped in 1978. Right. TMI-2 melts down. Most, if not all, construction stops. There are still projects that still were able, of course, you could see, were able to finish and go back online and such. NRC demanding more safety features in place, and some plants couldn't meet that demand. They shut down. A lot of the plants that I've been to have failed projects, and I'd ask them, like Seabrook in New Hampshire. They were supposed to have a Unit 2, adjacent to the Unit 1. I'd be standing outside. I'm looking at this dead building, across the way. I'm like, what's the story behind this? And everyone says 3 Mile Island happened. TVA has 3 sites: Sequoia, Watts Bar, and Browns Ferry. They should have had 4. Bellefonte. Should have had Bellefonte. What happened to that? Unit 1 was 80%, Unit 2 was 40%. Done. Right? 3 Mile Island happened. Shut down. So you see that as like a common trend, right? It was the end of an era, as it were. So 3 Mile Island happens. All construction stops. What exactly happened? It's big enough to kill the industry. What the hell happened? It was a partial meltdown. In the 40 years that the meltdown happens, no one died on site. The meltdown was contained. It was a partial meltdown, and it was contained. What does it mean to be contained? The containment building worked. The the slag or the corium was contained by the vessel. Everything worked. So what didn't? Why did it melt down in the first place? Let's talk about pressurizers for a bit, really briefly. Pressure, right? You maintain a specific level of pressure on a system. You raise the boiling points of the water in that system, right? So the more pressure, the higher the boiling point is. You want this in a pressurizer. You want this in a PWR, because then that means the core can get hotter while still being regulated. That's higher transfer of heat through the steam generators to then have more steam output to then turn the turbine faster to produce more power. Right? In order to maintain pressure on the system, you have a pressurizer. It's a big tower. It's a big tank. Inside it is a bunch of boiling water that's heated up to then maintain a bubble at the top of the pressurizer itself. Why is this pink? You have coils. It heats up the water. Right? In this example, right? And then injections. Cool. So you maintain a bubble, right? A nice fluffy little bubble up here by boiling and releasing the steam inside here, right? Maintaining the pressure on the system. To reduce the bubble, in order to have better control over the nth degrees of your system, so to raise or lower the temperature in the core, you have these spray valves, spray nozzles that just like spritzes water on that bubble to decrease it, to decrease the size. Yeah. In this, you have these things called pressurized or pressure release valves, pressure relief valves. That if this diminishes the bubble slowly, this diminishes the bubble quickly. It's a way to kill a system or to shut off, right? So in the case of TMI2, they go online, right? And they were only on for a year, right? For roughly a year. They go online, and everything's fine. They go down for refueling. They do inspections, everything's fine, everything checks out, cool, right? They replace one of these pressurizer relief valves, PRVs. They replace the PRV. They go in, they turn it back on. They can't maintain pressure. And you wonder why? This guy is stuck open. However, it doesn't occur to them exactly, the operators, doesn't occur to them exactly immediately that it's stuck open, because the communication between the status of this valve and the control room where it would alarm, where it would tell them, showed that this guy was closed, even though it was stuck open. Monitor says that it was closed. Computer says closed. Plus, also on top of that, any adjacent warning levels or warning lights that could be along with that could go along with that to be indicative of this, of a fault, also was covered up by maintenance tags that was hanging off of things and covering up that light. Operator experience, operation experience, right? The OE, right? It's things, stupid little things like that can cause major disaster. This guy's stuck open. They can't maintain pressure on the core. The boiling point drops. Core boils off. They go in. They manually close this, but by that time, the core is already gone. Right. On top of that, they have all these things to worry about. Such, they have a buildup of hydrogen because when you boil, you release you release gas and such. They had a lot of building up in the system. What happened? You have a lot of boiling in the system. exposes the core, yeah, right. Hydrogen buildup. In order to take care of that, but because that would lead to a hydrogen explosion if they let it go off to a specific point. So they vent gas. They vent xenon, krypton, radon, but not iodine, surprisingly enough. They did have to release, or they did have to vent to the environment in order to save the core. This worked. It didn't explode. It's good. TMI-1, the other one that's still on site, perfect condition. But it was recently decommissioned. And I'll get to that as well. Right. Put a pin in that. So it was contained. It didn't kill anybody. Two people got maybe overexposed as they were doing final inspections on the system. So why would it kill an industry like this? I don't want to say exactly it was the NIMBY crowd, the not in my backyard people, but it was kind of that. It was kind of that, right? As soon as they declassified some information, a lot of people were scared shitless, right? And a lot of people who already know about this, they already know about bombs. Several hundreds of nuclear test sites, nuclear bomb testing sites have gone off, right? And so overall, there's this ethos of fear, surrounding nuclear energy. So I understand that, right? Of course, of other things too. Also, I'm just going down the list here. So that didn't help the industry. A lot of them stopped. A lot of the ceasefire, but it didn't kill the industry entirely because we still had the ones that were still online. Today we have 94 online, and slowly but surely they're being decommissioned because they're reaching the end of their lifespan. I will get to that. What happened? Any wonder? Any question? What happened in 1986?
Ooh.
Precisely.
Yeah, some
like jump scare.
Some guys had a really bad day.
Yeah. I'm not going to go into detail with this because we already have a lecture that was on that and just the brutal details. He was good at it. So I'm not going to spend too much time on that necessarily. I will use that to expand on overall general fear of this type of industry. Rightfully fucking so. Right? I understand. I understand and I respect the paranoia. Because that's not just the only. Okay, we know about the big three, right? TMI-2, Chernobyl 4, and say Fukushima Daiichi in Japan in 2011. 3 main meltdowns, 3 major catastrophic failures of everything, right? That's incompetence, oversight, hubris, all the things that would be associated with the downfall of an entire industry, right? Awful. They're used as examples to not progress with it. Anti-nuclear anything, protests, right? A lot of these things, well, I mean, specifically, TMI-2 and Chernobyl 4 and such like that, were arguably one of the main reasons, several of the main reasons why either it all stopped suddenly, or it delayed a lot of the building time. Let's see, prior to NRC's regulations and TMI-2's example of what absolutely can happen, the build time of these plants were about 3 to 5 years. Now, after those events, it went from 5 to 10 years. Some absolutely horrendous example here. I'm going to slide to it. Watts Bar Unit 2, 42 years in development because they kept building it, killing it, building it, killing it, building it, killing it. Diablo Canyon in in California, in between LA and San Francisco. Took about 10 to 12 years to build because public protest. It was in the ethos of the time. It was in the water. Like, and Bruce Springsteen showed up at the gates and sung songs and about it. It was a big ordeal. Yes. A lot of delays for the industry in that case, in those examples. Chernobyl 4 details were already lectured. Other things that, and it's not that, and this isn't in America, this is just another one to compound. In Japan, all right, I'll get to Fukushima Daiichi, but I want to talk about this guy first. 1999, JCO at the Tokai Mira fuel making plant. They made fuel there. Criticality events. The oversight of the geometry of the vessels that they were using to mix uranium hexafluoride into nitric acid in order to develop uranium oxide. The stuff that then gets crushed down into pellets and then into fuel cladding to then go to plants. They were making that there, right? The dude was dumping shit in with a bucket. By hand, no gloves, no goggles, no anything. 3 people that were in that room at that time, in that fated day in 1999. One guy, Isachi Uchi, was pouring the bucket. Another guy, Masato, was overseeing it, and the boss was off by a little bit, a ways away from the tank. They pour it in. Normally, they would just throw it in and it'd be fine. But in this case, the concentration of uranium hexafluoride in the bucket that Isachi Uchi was holding was upwards of 40%, when it was normally around 10% because there was no oversight. He dumps it in, it goes critical. Blue flashing light in front of him, Shurinkov, everything right, awesome. Not awesome, sorry, it's brutal. Verbal tick. Hisashi Uchi lived for 83 days after being exposed to 1,700 rem. For the 1,700 rem, that's for the European crowd, because you use sieverts. I have a rant on that. 17,000 millisieverts. And that might not sound, it's what are those numbers? It sounds arbitrary, right? What can kill a man is about 50 rem. This guy, Isachi Uchi, was exposed to over 3 times that. It was a miracle that he survived for 83 days because he was being attended to by the top, ARS, acute radiation syndrome, doctors, in the country. A lot of what we know about how ARS affects the body in extreme cases comes from the information gathered by this unfortunate person, by unfortunately Isachi Uchi, who had that. Masato, the other guy, who also he accumulated 1,000 rem in one because he was a little bit closer. He survived for 211 days, but eventually succumbed to his wounds. So, why am I saying this? Because competence and not having enough respect for nuclear power can lead to disasters like this. So, in cases like, 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, JCO, and Fukushima, all of it is ignorance, incompetence, and such. the industry that we have today, and I'll get into the doom. It's a type of ethos that we have in regards to accidents, disasters, and these things. Go over Fukushima real quick. Fukushima, 2011. All right, the design of the plant, it's 6 boilers. They have 4 and then 5 and 6 off the side. Was a 25-year storm or 25-year earthquake, that caused a tsunami. It got over the sea dams that they did, flooded the lower basement, shut power to them. They didn't have power. They didn't have backup diesel generators because those diesel generators were built in the basement below sea level. Okay. They had been warned over and over. TEPCO was warned multiple times, like this thing is coming, prepare for it. And they're like, nah, superstition. Like the one time the Japanese aren't superstitious, right? Bites him in the ass. Ouch. Sorry. So that happens. Diesel news. They have a loss of coolant event. They have hydrogen explosions in 1,
Okay.
2, and 3. 4 also got shut down at the same time, but it was to a lesser degree. They all exploded. The cleanup process is still underway since 2011. This sent a shockwave through the industry and delayed a lot of the plants because now the NRC is like, everyone needs to do seismic testing. Right? One of those plants that actually has that problem is Watts Bar, right? And it's in the middle of Tennessee. However, it was built on a little fault line. So it delayed its thing as they went in to reinforce the structure and such. All plants had to do that. In fact, there were a lot of plants that got shut down partially because of one of those reasons. One of those plants is called SONGS, San Onofre Nuclear Generation Station. 2010, they go down for San Onofre 1 was one of the experiments in 1960. And then units 2 and 3 were built much later. They were standard pressurizers. Westinghouse. 2010, they go down for refueling. 2 gets refueled. 3 has small cracks in the pressurizer head that sits on top and maintains pressure and also controls the control rods, the moderators and such inside the core. They take that out to replace it. Right? At the same time, they're also doing some future proofing. They're changing out the steam generators that are in there. Previous ones were made by Westinghouse. The ones that they got for the replacement was made in Japan by Mitsubishi Heavy Materials. They got them, they brought them in, they cooled, they set them up, awesome, great. They turned it back online, went to 100%, fine, cool. They did a shutdown for 150 days, a mid-cycle inspection of how they were doing. They shoved the camera up in there, and they noticed 3,000, because steam generators have a lot of these things called U-tubes, right? It's the basic design of that. You got the outflow of steam. You got this separation that looks like this. You have inflow pipe like that, and then you have an outflow pipe like that. You have hot water coming in, right? And you have these tubes that go up and down like this. It's like a standard, kettle, pretty much. And they do inspections on these tubes right here, right? They find that 3,000 of these, because there's a lot of them in there, have damage on them in 15,000 different places, right? Specifically at this top range up here, right? That's bad. You want to know why? Because this is hot water. This is core water coming into these tubes, right? If you were to, and then outside of these U-tubes, is the clean water that then is steam, so that this is your primary separation between your primary and your secondary. You're dirty and you're clean, right? If these guys have fractures, any kind of fissures, you're releasing RCS, reactor coolant system water, potentially into the atmosphere, right? Into the turbine and down in there yes, the secondary side. You have release outside of the designated area that's allowed. They have massive damage on these U-tubes, right? And they're like, okay, do we have any engineers? Do we have any engineers in the audience? Okay, so in engineering, you have these things called tolerances, right? They're good to like get a little buffer, get in a little idea of where it can be, like sacrificing just a little bit of space over here to like compensate and such, because not everything is one to one, and everything is perfect. In the ideal world of engineering, tolerances don't matter, but in the practical world, you have things in the way that get you right on the fucking money, right? It was not right on the fucking money. You have as much flow of RCS coolant going through these tubes, and at such a fast rate that you now have to consider resonance frequencies, right? It's going so fast, it's actually making them vibrate like that.
Uh-huh.
The majority of the damage was done up here because that is the end of the vibration right there. So they're like, okay, we just went down for about 2 years to put these new dudes in. What can we do to get it back online? Because we spent about $1 billion getting these things in and getting everything good, right? And the customers are waiting, right? How do we solve this? Okay, we can put plugs strategically on some of these guys, right? And make it so that the ones that have the most damage don't have flow through it. Well, that would then amplify the amount of pressure that's going through the ones that are okay, which would only extend the amount of damage to the rest of the ones. Right? Okay. What about anchoring? You put this bracket right here, and then you run a little wire up here through the tube, and it's like that, and then wrench it down to kind of hold it in place. No, that's logistically speaking, that's only going to add more things to cause wear. Okay, what about we run it at maybe not at 100%, run the reactor at 70%. So they put in a program, they put in a computer program, and they say, okay, simulation says 70% is okay. They turn it back on, they run it at 70%, shut it back down, inspect. The computer failed them. The computer said no, there was more damage. And so by the time of about halfway through 2013, they decided to cut their loss, and by December, San Onofre, units 2 and 3 were dead. They're in decommission. And if you guys are ever, south of LA, it's the building that looks like two titties because it has a nipple on top. Yeah. It's iconic. It's right on along the interstate going down. Also on top of that, while that was going on, I'm going to link it back to Fukushima. Because San Onofre and Diablo Canyon are on the San Andreas fault line, they also couldn't pass inspections. And that was one of the things that the anti-nuclear people were also saying. Like, why would you build a damn plant on an active fault line? Doesn't make any sense. Right? That's why San Diego gets a lot of their power from Palo Verde out in the desert in Arizona, where there isn't that. On the other side of the mountain. So, despite all these examples, right, the nuclear industry remains safe, remains safest, right? All these examples, I know this because it's been told to me a bunch of times in like morning meetings. Right? It's the safety culture that we have, that I have to uphold as an RP. Right? It's still good. It's still solid. Right? My brick tables are like littered with newsletters of like, oh, this person left a coat hanging on the back of a chair, and someone tripped slightly on the jacket, and so we can't hang our coats on the back of our chairs anymore because of that. That's how anal it is. That's how kind of tight it is. But it wouldn't be as well oiled and as safe as it is if we didn't have that safety culture. Right? Despite all of this, only out of the entire industry, out of worldwide, 0.4% of all the nuclear power plants that have ever existed have ended in catastrophic failure. TMI, Chernobyl, and Fukushima. And then things around in there, yeah, but 0.4% was a number that I was able to find. Only that out of all that they have done. So, in this case, specifically in America, we're going back to America. Let me go on to the next portion of the graph. Oh, yeah. Right. That's kind of important. 1987, the INF Treaty. It's the nuclear ceasefire and the agreement between America and Russia to diminish nuclear armaments and storage and such. But let me move on to the next section. Also on this graph, I have this, the NRC licensing. Right? So why would you want to license a plant? If it is as safe as it is, then why can't you just let a plant run for 100 years, right? The NRC licenses are in place so that there is less negligence in long-term nuclear power facilities. The majority of all plants have their initial license set at between 30 and 40 years of operation on average, depending on the inspections done, the 3 to 4 year process for and the NRC to grant a license. On the graph, it looks like something like this. It looks something like this. Right? So you have the blue. The blue here is the duration of the first license. You can always relicense. It's kind of expensive, and I'll get to that, but you can always relicense a plant. If you feel like it's running okay, and it's not going to run into catastrophic failure, in between the start and the end of the license, you can always relicense. You can always change out components. You can always do things and such, but certain things you can't. You can license. You can do a second license, right? Are you seeing are you starting to see a trend? Because I'm starting to see a little trend here. That in this case, a lot of the plants from the 1960s are on their third licenses, and gradually over time, the expected efficiency of production beyond the scope of failure diminishes from license to license about 10 years. Here's where I get into the doom aspect of this. How is this a warning in this case? Let's move let's move the graph around a little bit and see if you guys can identify a specific trend here. Yeah. I gotcha. All that good stuff. Okay, now we're getting into the older ones. Okay, yeah, that's a little bit more, a little bit better, a little bit more promising and such, and all that. We back it up to about here. Okay. So if you notice, by 2040, the majority of the plants that are currently on their second license are going to be on their third. A lot of the plants back in that started at around 1970 will be beyond that, right? The next license that they would have that they would be able to do is only about 5 to 10 years. And as much money as it costs to relicense and to replace the components that would be, if that would make it more efficient to run longer, you'd only have like 5 to 10 years by the expenses, because it is kind of expensive to relicense the plant. So by 2040, nearly 50% of the units in America will be decommissioned, making the nuclear energy contribution in America less than 10%, based on that graph. Only about 10%, with no guarantee that renewables, solar, hydro, and wind, will be able to beat out coal and gas in replacement. In order to curve this transition at around 2040, we should have started on this generational replacement back in 2005 or 2010, when the only thing that we had online or really promising was Vogel 3 and 4. Prior to Vogel 3 and 4, VC Summer also tried to do AP 1000s, but that kind of ended up in scandal. Just a little bit of scandal. So why is this with the NRC? Okay. So far, no units have been relicensed 4 times. We have not seen it. Based on this limitation, right? Plant owners and builders work with that limitation. So they are good for that 40 years. But anything after that, it becomes harder and harder to replace these components based on the geometry that you started out with. If you start out with the geometry of the ethos or the mindset, like, in 40 years it's going to be dead anyway, you're going to be running into some issues where things can't very necessarily easily and cheaply be replaced. So they're built around that type of mentality, which, at some of the plants that I've been to, you can see that degradation more so than others. Constantly, having to be fixed and such, to a point where it would just be cheaper to just total it and send it into decommission. We're going to see that more and more as time goes on. So about the NRC. Okay, so the NRC is a government body, right? They are tasked with regulating and licensing and education, all that stuff. And the Department of Energy does research and development, right? But the NRC does all that stuff, licensing and regulation, right? The NRC is given a budget by Congress, agreed upon at the start of the year, and then by law they have to pay back 90% of what they're loaned, of what they're given. How they collect that 90% back is they get that from fees from the licensees, from the people that own these plants and that have the licenses, hold the licenses. Think about it like this: if you start off with a brand new reactor design, and you take it to the NRC, say, look at this, and engineers, beautiful minds, they're like, give me an approval for this thing, okay? All right, so the cost of just looking over a design and approving a design is $45 million to $75 million there. Plus also the cost of however it would take to, to fund all the, pay the salaries and such, and just man hours, labor in doing that. It's fractal, right? It's you have the overview, yeah, but then every little nitty gritty thing needs to be 100% because, as we saw in 3 Mile Island, anything can be a linchpin. And so you have this microscopic type of look on these designs. So you get the license, you get everything set up, right? By the time that you're done with a solid license, you have already spent well in the upwards of about $750,000 to $1 million, getting it relicensed or getting it licensed and then subsequently relicensed. Not only the maintenance that you have to do on these things, or the $100,000 a year fee for the NRC to be there, plus the $300 it takes for labor, right? Plus the construction of NRC offices on site. And it would take you about 3 to 4 years to get into the renewal process. So that stacks up. What that does is that bars new companies from starting reactors due to the high cost ceiling, and it just hikes the cost of caring for the Gen 2 units. I could go on and on about the NRC, right? Love them, right? They're the ones that set the limits that then cause me to not die, right? That's cool. But when it comes to this, like, why do they have to pay back 90% of a thing that is absolutely a necessary thing to have? As you would think, well, the Treasury needs to get theirs back. They pull from the Treasury. And then the Treasury pulls from taxpayers. So the taxpayers then pay the Treasury, and then the Congress tells the Treasury to pay the NRC how much. And they have to pay back 90%. Why would they necessarily have to pay back 90%? I can see two things for this. I can surmise two things with this, and I'm kind of going off a script. I'm sorry. One, it makes it so that the NRC is kept in line. Make sure that the NRC is able to collect their fees, able to do their work, and to have the funds in order to operate as like a steady flow of income, so that they don't have to rely on the free market in order to do their business. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to afford it. Now, that's point one. And point two is, why do they have to pay back 90%? Why can't it be less than that? Because there's no guarantee that even if they reduce the amount that if you reduce the amount that the NRC has to pay back, say 60 or 50%, that there's no guarantee that the NRC wouldn't fall into corruption and not lower their fees as in extension. So it's kind of corruption prevention in a way, in a roundabout way. I like to think the best about the NRC because of what they do. However, it does kind of bar forward progress in the industry. You don't have a whole lot of tech startups in California. Well, you have the one, but they're having a painful ass time. So I've said a bunch of doom, right? A bunch of negative things, and I'm trying to wrap this up here. There are 3 things that I can say that will revitalize the milieu, make us feel better about the future, or potentially a solution for what eventually will be coming in 2040, 2045, 2050. All right. These numbers in front of you, these the licensing period in time is on a case-by-case basis. These are averages, yes, but it's on a case-by-case basis. Because what the NRC finds is applicable, they could... An example. Sharon Harris, right? Sharon Harris won. You can go in with at the end of a 30-year period, and then they go into inspections. And I'm like, that's perfect. This plant is perfect. It's pristine. It's like it just got built, and they can license for another 30 years based on what they find. But when it comes to averages, it's like this. And so the hope is that better plants have been plants that have been tailored better or better maintained have longer lifespans, and some plants, some owners on case by case basis do have the idea of century proofing their stuff, century proofing their plants. So I lead you to item number 1, which is relicensing, a sort of restructuring of the licensing. You can restructure the NRC fees. You can lower what the NRC pays back, but also as that exchange, you can also demand the NRC to also reduce equally the fees that they charge to licensees to reduce potential corruption. You can do like several of the other plants that have been going up. You can future-proof plants components. You can make, I guess, spend a little bit more money on better programs or better plant equipment and such. You can keep the plants top notch, and so that you can do exactly what I just said. Longer licensing periods. But if they have to go, if they're decommissioned, if they have to go, if things just doesn't work out for them, and whatever, what else do you do, right? What else can you do? Number 2, you can reuse them, right? The land that is on that these plants are on is the owned land, right? And when it comes to having a plant on a specific area and how long that area is like cordoned off to any other type of development aside from nuclear is mainly a conversation about the EPA, which I don't have credentials in. But in this case, if you already have controlled area and the plant that's there has to be leveled, and there's no other way around it, you can level the plant. You can level the core, decommission, full decommissioning, and then put SMRs on it, small modular reactors. We're already seeing a lot of development with that in other countries. China has a lot of SMRs. TVA has their initial SMR project on the Clinch River in Tennessee. The BWRX 300 its nameplate's sake is able to put out 300 megawatts per hour. It's a fraction of these big dudes. However, they're smaller. You can stack them up on one of these already controlled areas. And for the majority of the time, you already have dry cask storage on these sites that they're indefinitely, permanently there until we have a better solution to use spent fuel. Also, on top of that, if anybody has seen this in the news, that Microsoft is trying to buy TMI-1, just trying to buy 3 Mile Island. That's kind of, for to fund and power their own data storage on site.
Why are you bouncing all the time?
Which actually probably kind of cool, because
What happened?
the owners, when they decommissioned it,
Don't interrupt the talk.
the owners when they
What?
decommissioned it is.
Why is this bouncing all the time?
Can you hear me? Am I good?
Here's the presentation.
Yeah, you're good.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. All right. So the decommissioning process. Where was I? TMI-1 was already in decommissioning process. But they left it, the license ended, and they didn't renew it, but it was in pristine condition. And so by 2028 or 2029, 2030, we're going to see a data storage facility for Microsoft, grow out of the weeds in around TMI, and they're going to put TMI back. They're going to relicense it. They're going to put it back on. They're going to use it to have dedicated power for the data storage. I believe that's a good idea because it keeps them online. It keeps them online under I'd say near impervious billionaire companies, that the chance of them going bankrupt and such like that is near a null point. Plus, also, if you buy a plant, you're kind of settled with it until you sell it. Right? You're kind of responsible for it in that case. You got a certain company called Holtec. I just bought Palisades in Michigan and Oyster Creek in New Jersey. They also plan to do that. They're either going to reopen it or close it down and level it, put SMRs on site. That sounds great. Sounds awesome. Or in terms of reusing, if you can't put out power anymore, if you can't put out power reliably anymore, if you still have the facilities, if the components still work, you can do what China does. China has a lot of these plants, a lot of the smaller ones, also putting out thermal heat out of the steam gen, not the core, but out of the steam gen, and putting that into public heat systems to then heat villages. That's also potential. It's also a pretty good idea to reuse some of these plants that are going down. And then the third one, and I think this is probably the more controversial aspect, and I'm getting close. You can repurpose them. What does the future look like for nuclear in this case? What's been in development for 10 years, and every 10 years people say that we'll have it in 10 years, and then 10 years go by, and all that fusion, right? So you have nuclear fusion on the horizon. What kind of fuel does fusion use? Right? It uses hydrogen. Uses specific isotopes of hydrogen. Right? It uses deuterium and tritium in that process. You fuse deuterium and tritium together, or H2 and H3. You fuse them together, you get a free-flowing neutron and helium-4, or helium-3. Wait, helium-4. Yeah. You get helium-4, and then helium-4 also has a high, fusing rate, but you start with tritium. What is a natural byproduct of having free-flowing neutrons in demineralized water? A neutron hits a water molecule. What happens? You split off the hydrogen. Potentially, you could split off the hydrogen from the oxygen. Then, now you have flowing hydrogen molecules. Plus, also neutrons to then say collide in with that, that becomes helium, or becomes hydrogen 2. Right? You keep doing that, you keep overexposing these free-flowing hydrogen molecules, you'll eventually get up to tritium. In fact, that's something that we have to mitigate against when we're doing samples of core, samples of that, because it's just a natural activation product, neutron activation product in fission cores. I don't think I'm at liberty to say, but there are few plants that come to mind when it comes to harvesting tritium from RCS. It's potential. It's a effluence. It's a RCS effluence, and it's a specific high qualified way to be able to meter it. Necessary. All that good stuff. Okay. You can use that. You can keep these guys up to farm tritium for the fusion future that we have potential on the horizon. Because eventually we'll run out of that, or eventually we'll need that, and the only alternative is to just go up to the moon, right, and get helium-3 from regolith, and that doesn't sound cheap. Okay. Plus, also you have other elements that are going on at the same time. You have cobalt-60 in certain plants that have a special type of metal. You have cesium-137 that's used as radioactive sources for testing our instruments. You have strontium-90, I believe that's medical. Technetium-99, also rare. It's also radioactive and such. We get that. Iodine-131, that is kind of bad, but iodine-131 is also used in treating thyroid. It's bad for the thyroid, yes, but it's also treated. So you have all of these things. You have plutonium as well. You have all this good stuff. You can get that from these plants if you keep them up, and you can still produce these significantly rare isotopes. And you can still do that even at like half the max capacity because you're not dumping power onto the grid. What you're farming for are these rare isotopes. And so if we want potentially a fusion future, we need to be a little bit more, I guess, respectful for the potential of the homegrown tritium that we get from fission power. Just a thought. But overall, and I'm getting to the end of this, yes, that is scary. This graph is kind of scary. I've been staring at this thing for a minute. So I've been staring at this graph for a minute. And I'm like, God damn, that's pretty damn apparent. However, the future is pretty damn hopeful, because although there might not be, but actually, yeah, there are a few construction sites in America beyond Vogel. Turkey Point is getting their own AP1000s. They are advanced pressurizers, and they are designed to be sentry-proof. That's why I like Vogel so much, not because of the bird thing, right? So
not just the
cool.
bird thing.
You're right. It's just the bird thing. I'm not trying to cover up for it. Furry in disguise or whatever. Turkey Point in Florida is going to break ground soon for their own AP1000s, advanced pressurizer with the nameplate capacity of 1,000 megawatts. You have SMR projects cropping up and things like that. If the NRC, if these companies are able to afford them, like Microsoft is able to afford it, say Amazon is able to afford it. The Apple eventually, because that's also a potential, right? If the billionaires spearhead the next generation or the next renaissance in America, even if it's dedicated to like storing data of your asshole pics because they need to, but if it leads to the renaissance, then fine, say my facial recognition and such, AI and all that. In order to curb what's coming in the next 20 years, we have to start now. And people scoffing at Microsoft buying TMI to then turn it back on is something that I think is a little short-sighted, because a lot of people don't know about what's coming down the pike. So I'm all for Microsoft buying the thing. I'm all for the private industries coming up and doing all that. But so long as we have the restrictions and limitations that the NRC has, as much as they protect, they're also stifling. I'm not suggesting going back to AEC type of politics, because that was ass. That's awful. What I'm saying is, if there's any form of way that the NRC would be limiting potential future to save the nuclear industry, then I feel like it should be addressed. Like how I said in the relicensing aspect. Lower what the NRC pays back, but also make them reduce their fees. But still give them the same amounts, or on average the same amount that Congress would agree for them to do. Right? Now, most of what I've talked about today is the bare kind of tippy top of the industry. I went over, what is that? Nearly 100 years. Yeah, gotta give me some credit. Being able to get that done in an hour and a half roughly. Oh yeah, kind of. Yeah, it's about an hour and a half. We started at 2:30, and now it's 4:15. Okay, yeah, about an hour, 45 minutes. All that good stuff. There's a lot of good material that's on this, and in fact, I had the confidence to be able to display all of this information for you guys, for the European crowd, because it's no longer declassified information, and for the longest time, it hasn't been. This graph was made on information that I was able to pull from Wikipedia, and this is just America. Right, there's a big long list of nuclear power reactors in America, and it goes over all the countries because they pulled that from the IAEA. And the IAEA has a good, really good resources to look up on. Right, so if you ever want to tear down some stats in here or get specific about certain things, that would be a good resource to go to. Right, you can look at this up. You're not going to get tracked by the FBI or tracked by the central intelligence agencies where you live. So, precisely, you can don't be doomed yet, right? There's still a chance to be able to save this. In this case, thank you. I'm done. I'm open for questions.
Imagine clapping noises here. Woo! Clap, 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 clap. I don't know, break my
I have a
controllers.
question. I have a question.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Hey,
Let's hear some questions.
all right.
I
I don't know if this is really related to your lecture at all, but when you spoke about 3 Mile Island, like I told you, and I'm sure everybody else heard me when I accidentally interrupted Sky. Sorry about that again. That I used to live a couple blocks away from 3 Mile Island, and I saw this Netflix special about it. My question is Bechtel still in the industry, or did they get fucked after the 3 Mile Island incident? Is Bechtel
That is a
still
name
around?
that I haven't heard in a while.
long time.
Construction companies, the Bechtel. Where
They,
have I
like-
heard that name last?
They were, at least in the context that I heard about it, they were like part of the
Mhm.
commission that was I know they did a lot of missteps after the 3 Mile Island incident, and they were trying to cover it up, especially when there were people that would children who were out playing would come home and all of a sudden they'd have radiation burns all over them. And
The hell?
yeah, and then they
don't
even
think
tried
that's-
to silence an employee who worked at 3 Mile Island, and they pretty much ruined his life. So that's why I asked if Bechtel's still around.
After the meltdown?
I think so. Yeah, it was shortly after the meltdown when all that drama happened. I don't know if you knew anything about it or not.
That's interesting. That's news to me. I didn't see that in any of the research that I did.
Gotcha.
But that's
I don't know. I saw it on
clearly
Netflix
unfortunate. Kind of
documentary.
throws off that. But
Well,
again, it's the lackadaisical aspect of the
Yeah.
safety and such, and closed off and all that. It compounds
Right.
into affecting public health and safety in that regard.
Right.
Unfortunately.
Gotcha. All right. Well, thank you for answering my question, buddy. Appreciate it.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah. It's not so much a question, but I could weave it into one. throughout this whole talk, we kind of have the mammoth in the room, and that is the fossil fuels industry, because it
Yes.
sees the nuclear industry as a competitor, and we know they have acted to, well, fuck us.
Mm-hmm.
I know you haven't really focused on this, but do you have any, well, strategy or policy prescriptions in how we can tackle them?
Like you said, it was a behemoth, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's unless you were to absolutely get rid of the potential of like lobbyists and people who consistently push the like green coal. Have you ever heard of green coal before? Right? Carbon capture processes in order to mitigate this, right? But that's only inviting more coal plants and more gas plants to be produced. It's tough.
The whole concept of the carbon footprint.
Right.
Yeah.
Throughout all of this, the amount of carbon output in terms of tons, it's a fraction. To produce one plant, it's the same amount of, if I remember this correctly, if it's to build a plant, to build a single unit, is the same as building 10 acres of solar and about 5 acres of wind turbines, comparatively. The amount of people who succumb or pass away to the effects of lung diseases, emphysema, bronchitis, and such as like downwind from coal plants and gas plants, natural gas plants, it's in the upwards of 20 to 2 to 300,000 people per year in America. I'm not sure about overseas. I'm pretty sure you guys are a little bit more sophisticated, aside from Germany. But yes, and it's such a large industry that I wouldn't know how to penetrate that on my level. I can really, and that's also kind of me stepping out of scope and getting further into the weeds of the politics of the aspect. You know, I did go over a lot of the politics in this speech, but. By and large, I didn't touch the big daddies, right?
Yeah,
it's still a dominant thing, and in my idea is like how about reduce the amount of coal and gas that is being burnt so that we can have more in storage, or if and when some kind of natural disaster happens, right? You can throw up a natural gas plant, several units of a gas plant, within 1 to 2 years, because of how refined that is, how refined that system is to make to make a natural gas burner. If society were to collapse and you've spent all of your quickly resourcefully accessible stuff, then or fuel, like resource-based fuel, then what are you left with? And so that kind of paranoia doesn't really matter in the case of now returns when it comes to money and lobbying and having congressmen pass laws to further the growth of the coal and gas. We have seen a lot of shutdowns of coal plants, granted, but a lot more gas to replace it. It's still pretty much up there. And if we didn't have the, I guess, the paranoia, plus also the paranoia driven policies that made tighter restrictions and shut down a lot of the build processes of these plants, we wouldn't have the 35-year generational gap that we have.
Yeah.
Surrounding that, and so we would have had much bigger industry, methinks conspiracy brain turns on, and methinks that somehow the coal and gas industry was responsible for pushing that paranoia onto the uneducated populace.
Over here in Europe,
Because
I
they didn't
know for a
have the
fact-
resources to be educated because of AEC era politics. And
Yeah.
hush, hush, don't talk about it.
Over here in Europe, I know for a fact that a lot of our anti-nuclear lobby has been heavily funded by the fossil fuels. That is just a fact.
It's almost like they're trying to not hide at all because of how obvious it is.
Yeah.
It's very apparent what they're doing. So, I hope that answers your question.
Are you able to
Thank you.
stream the thingy to Discord? There's Astral watching. I need to start tipping the personal joke stuff. Yeah, but I got a tip.
Okay, I've been BirdSatan. You have been DGen Tech. This has been the nuclear industry. Love you. Have a good night.
Mhm.
Well,
Thank you.